Welcome to today's webinar, How iPad Management in Education Has Evolved. My name's Nick Thompson, and I'll be your host today. Joining me is our education evangelist, Sam. Sam, welcome.
Hi, everyone.
All right, so what are we going to cover today? Let's take a look at our agenda. First, we're going to do a brief overview of Jamf. Just want to make sure everyone's on sort of the same knowledge base here about who we are and what we offer. Then Sam's going to talk a little bit more about what's new in Apple Education Management. A lot has changed over the past few years. We're going to discuss then using iPad in new ways, specifically within education, and how to manage iPad with modern tools. We'll discuss some next steps and wrap up with some Q&A. So let's jump into our first topic here, an overview of Jamf. So we are Jamf, and our mission here is to help organizations succeed with Apple. And we do that with our two products called Jamf Now and Jamf Pro. Jamf Now is our simple device management tool, really designed for smaller organizations. Kind of no IT experience is required with Jamf Now. And then Jamf Pro is our professional level one, really Apple management for IT pros, probably a lot of you on today's webinar here. And because of that, we are actually going to focus specifically on Jamf Pro today. And that's because it really covers the complete lifecycle management of Mac and iOS, from deploying devices, getting them into students' hands, getting them configured with all the right settings, making sure they all have the right apps on there, allowing IT to grab a whole inventory data of all these devices, making sure they're secure, and providing resources for students and teachers to get new content. This is what Jamf Pro looks like. It's really just a web-based management console, so you can access it from any web browser. The server component can just be hosted in the cloud, which a lot of people are doing, or you can run it on a very lightweight on-premise server. It integrates with a lot of the stuff you already have in place, like directory services and single sign-on, things like that. And we work really deeply with Apple's deployment programs, which Sam is going to talk a lot more about. Lastly, we used to call this the Casper Suite. So if anyone remembers that name, we've rebranded. Our crack marketing team did a great job rebranding it here from Casper Suite to Jamf Pro. So we are now Jamf Pro. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sam now, and he's going to talk about what's new in Apple Education Management.
All right. Thanks, Nick. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. Today, we're going to talk about new education features and programs from Apple that give more flexibility, more features, and simplified workflows to schools that use iPads. Now, a lot of what we're going to talk about today has only been released in the last 18 months or so. So whether you're considering an iPad deployment or already have them in your schools, this webinar is going to show you some of the great innovation we've seen from Apple recently. Now, before we can dive in and really appreciate what's new in iPad management, we need to take a moment to talk about Apple and education and how this all got started. Now, Apple has had a focus on students in the classroom since their inception, and they once famously stated, "Education is deep in Apple's DNA." Back in the 1980s, Steve Jobs personally worked with Congress and the California State Assembly to make it easier for corporations to donate computers to schools as long as they were intended to be used by students. And then under its program titled Kids Can't Wait, Apple donated over 9,000 Apple IIs to eligible schools in California. That's close to $21 million worth of equipment. You could consider this to be the first major charitable effort from Apple to the education world. And then when you look at a whole generation that had their first personal connection with a computer be a Macintosh in the classroom, you can trace it back to Steve's influence and work in the 80s. Now, Apple is deeply invested in education, and this commitment continues to this day with charitable programs like ConnectEd and some of the other education-specific resources we're going to talk about. And then, when Apple released the first iPad in 2010, it sold like crazy because it was a fantastic personal device. But from an administrative standpoint for IT, tools to manage this new kind of device and operating system at scale were very basic. Management was a very manual, hands-on-glass approach, and there really weren't great ways to scale up from just a handful of devices. But despite some of the early challenges managing iOS at scale, classrooms started exploring iPads for really great reasons. And what are they? They can be broken down into 3 parts: hardware, software, and accessibility. On the hardware front, it's simply amazing. We're talking about the best touchscreen device on the market, powered by an incredibly fast processor with great battery life. Ever since the iPad 2, we've had 2 high-definition cameras. And iPads last a really long time and retain their value, which is really important for schools. Now, talking about the form factor of iPad, it's incredibly flexible. And the fact that it doesn't have a keyboard allows it to be used just as well in a beanbag chair, during group time on the carpet, or on the go. Now, keep in mind, innovative classrooms don't want to be forced to find flat surfaces like desks to work on their devices. And for students or topics that need keyboards, there are lots of options out there to meet student needs. And from a software perspective, iOS brought the simplicity and the productivity needed to have a device with mass appeal. The ease of use was incredibly attractive. The user interface is super intuitive. And my favorite part, the act of discovering and installing new software from this thing called the App Store was a welcome departure from a world scared of viruses and spyware. And along with all of those features, you had a device that included the accessibility options that ensure that all users, regardless of physical capability, had the opportunity to be successful users of cutting-edge technology. Now, the point of all of this is Apple created the world's best personal computing device with the iPad. They didn't start with the mindset of making a device that could be locked down, managed, or controlled. They created a device that one person could love, and they did a fantastic job. Now at Jamf, the reason we feel so strongly about Apple technology is its platforms put students and users at the center of the equation. Now, going back to the schools, what happened next was really interesting. Schools started to see the educational benefits of the iPad and fell in love. And word started to spread about how well this amazing technology was working for them. So where you started with 5 iPads, suddenly there were 50 and then 500. So keep in mind, we had this quote-unquote personal device that all of a sudden needed to be managed. And that prompted questions that honestly may not have been thought of up to that point. For example, how are you going to deploy and purchase apps? What's your Apple ID strategy? Are you going to create an Apple ID per student or per device? And how are you going to make sure that iOS and the apps constantly stay up to date? Outside of those iOS-specific questions, you've got regular device management problems to solve as well. How do you get Wi-Fi credentials to a device? How do you put the proper restrictions on to make sure that they're being used as intended? So lots of questions, and Apple solved them only 3 short months after the release of the iPad with mobile device management. Now, mobile device management, or MDM for short, is a framework that Apple built into iOS and macOS that allows companies like Jamf to develop tools to manage devices by simplifying deployments, pulling inventory data, managing settings with things called configuration profiles, and a whole lot more. And this was extremely popular with both businesses and schools and was the beginning of a new era of device management. Now, while it did solve for many deployment considerations, primarily in the business world, you all know this, education is a unique environment for a lot of reasons you don't encounter in the enterprise. Now, I'm half joking when I say this, but the challenges that education IT faces versus most small businesses or enterprises would be enough to scare away a good number of CTOs. So what's unique about education environments? In a school of 4 grade levels, you have at minimum a 25% user turnover every single year. And not only that, they all show up on the same day. Now, depending if your iPads are take-home one-to-one devices or in carts at the school, they may not have been touched over the summer, which means apps and iOS updates need to be done quickly. And those are just the logistical issues. Let's keep in mind, we're talking about students from the age of 5 to 18 as a part of this process. So for one, they may not be able to legally accept software license agreements, be expected to have an Apple ID, or even simply follow instructions to download the right apps. So MDM continued to evolve and get new features, but it still left these education-specific problems unsolved for. But then in 2015, something amazing happened. At the 2015 Worldwide Developer Conference, Apple announced some major changes to the way that we deploy apps to devices. For the first time ever, you could get an app to a device without an Apple ID completely over the air. And this was huge. In the past, you would either generate Apple IDs in bulk in some very non-Apple approved ways for VPP, or if you really didn't want Apple IDs involved, you could use Configurator, but then you lose the ability to manage and update applications on the fly. So app distribution in education has always been a challenge, but Apple completely solved for that with this new feature I'm talking about called device-based distribution. Now, while that announcement was amazing on its own, it was more importantly a sign of great things to come. So then in March of 2016, iOS 9.3 was announced, and with it came a mountain of changes for education to make deployments more flexible and capable. So now we have two distinct tracks to deploy and manage iPads. If you're a business, you use the tools available at deploy.apple.com. And if you're a school, you use school.apple.com. Now, along with iOS 9.3 came some other specific features that we'll dive into in just a moment, but I want to start with Apple School Manager. Now, in the old world, which keep in mind, less than 2 years ago, you had multiple logins for various systems depending if you were purchasing apps or assigning devices to MDM servers. But now, Apple School Manager is a single portal you can use to access all of Apple's back-end systems. And beyond that, it brings great capabilities like syncing class schedules, rosters, and creating managed Apple IDs for students, which extend the use of iPads in even more creative ways. Now, if you've been waiting for the right time to deploy or manage your iPads properly, now is that time. And mobile device management continued to evolve on its own, as well as solve even more problems that educators faced. For a long time, even though you could get apps to iPads, you couldn't dictate where they lived on the home screen or the dock. Now, this can be especially helpful in younger grades because students want a consistent experience regardless of the device they pick up, and we can do that now. iPads also come preloaded with default apps that honestly may or may not be useful to students. So we can now hide those apps to reduce the amount of distractions. We can prevent students from modifying their Bluetooth settings to allow the classroom app to work, which we'll talk about more in a few slides. And if you have some really tech-savvy students, you might have heard they've discovered alternative app stores to get around restrictions and install apps that they want. We won't go into the details today, but our ability to block enterprise certificates allows us to ensure students will only ever get apps that we pre-approve. And finally, lost mode. Jamf and Apple have never been in the business of student tracking. And keep in mind, if you're trying to track your one-to-one take-home student devices, that realistically means you're trying to track students. So Apple is helping balance this need for student privacy versus the need for IT to track down lost devices. Lost mode allows you to see where an iPad physically is, and it's very transparent to the end user that IT is tracking the location. So as you can see, Apple has continued to innovate and change the way that we manage iPads in education. And that's really great for IT, but it's only half of the equation. Beyond those back-end management changes, Apple has opened the doors to using iPads in new creative ways in the classroom. And they also offer training for teachers so they can get the most out of their devices. So let's talk about some of these new ways to use iPads. Personalized shared iPad. This is the biggest paradigm shift that Apple has offered to the education world. Historically, iPads were single-user devices. There was no login or logout. In today's world, though, Apple School Manager and managed Apple IDs can allow your iPads to be used by multiple students throughout the day. Similar to a computer, they can get their own personalized environment and be confident that their apps and content stay intact. So there's no longer a need to sync documents to third-party services like Dropbox or Google Drive. And Apple IDs alone are an interesting concept today. Like I said before, they used to be required to get apps to devices, but that's not really the case. Managed Apple IDs are required for this concept of personalized shared iPads. So now, not only are there fewer reasons to use traditional Apple IDs, but when you do need them, they're very simple to create en masse. Now, the Classroom app is one of my favorite enhancements to Apple's education offerings. The Classroom app gives teachers the ability to manage their classroom devices without extensive training. And with just a few taps, a teacher can guide their student into applications, lock them in if desired, navigate to web pages, or even specific chapters in iBooks. And a teacher also has the ability to view a student's screen from his or her iPad while balancing that privacy need. Students will see the blue AirPlay banner on top of their device. Now, I know it's a little small on the screen, but you can see class and roster information. This can be pulled in from an SIS syncing to Apple School Manager or loaded into Jamf Pro several other ways. But regardless of how the information gets there, the Classroom app is a great way to make sure iPads are being used as intended in the classroom. Now, iTunes U has been out a long time, but it's still a fantastic tool that continues to evolve. For those of you that don't know, iTunes U provides everything an instructor needs to bring the classroom together on an iPad. We can build lessons with apps and your own personal materials. We can collect and grade assignments, start class discussions, or talk with students one-on-one to answer questions and provide valuable feedback. And additionally, you can see when students have viewed or completed assignments and remind them when they're due. The big update from last year allowed students to turn in documents, work, and homework directly from their mobile devices into iTunes U. And then a teacher can annotate these documents and leave comments and feedback. And iWork and Apple Pencil. Apple includes iWork with all new iPads, and it's gotten some major updates that make it a perfect fit for the classroom. You can now collaborate with other students in real time natively inside the iOS and macOS applications. Now, this was released just a few months ago, but it is a far better experience than trying to work together in a web browser. And Apple Pencil. There's nothing more synonymous with schools than pencils. They're a great tool for teachers to grade, students to create digitally and take notes. And as the field of digital arts expands, I believe we're going to see more schools teaching graphic design and digital illustration, and an Apple Pencil is a great vehicle for that. So we've talked about a lot so far. We've talked about changes in hardware, software, deployment tools, but the feather in Apple's cap this last year was the teacher enablement resources they provided. So let's talk through a few of them. Apple has a new training and certification course for teachers called the Apple Teacher Program. It's free, and you can explore modules for iOS and macOS that really teach and show how to get the most out of your Apple devices in the classroom. You earn badges, and at the end, you can officially call yourself an Apple teacher. Field trips to the Apple Store are a great way to introduce students to new experiences as well. The creative teams at your local Apple retail store will help design a field trip where students will create digital video, audio, or learn about coding. Now, you can sign up and learn more about these at apple.com/retail/field trip. And speaking of field trips, virtual field trips are just one example of some of the great lesson plans available on iTunes U. As a teacher, you can find apps, content, and curriculum to augment or enhance what you're already doing in the classroom. So whether students are learning about pyramids or rainforests, there are great ways to elevate that learning experience by using iPads. And finally, Apple introduced Swift Playgrounds for iOS. This is a great way to introduce students to the concepts of coding without requiring a strong technical background. And Apple also has ideas and lesson plans prepackaged for teachers that want to bring this into their classroom. So hopefully you saw today, there isn't just one feature or one program that make iPads a great fit for the classroom. It's everything together that brings a phenomenal experience to students. The hardware, the software, the deployment tools, creative uses of iPads in the classroom, and teacher enablement are the 5 pillars of Apple's success in education. So hopefully you've enjoyed what I've shown you today. Now Nick is going to take it a few steps further and show you how to manage iPads with modern tools.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, one of my favorites is the Swift Playgrounds. I think that's going to be an amazing thing for kids to do in school. So how do you tie all this together, right? How do you use a modern tool to manage iPads in education? Well, I've got 3 recommendations, really kind of 3 basic steps to take. The first is sign up for Apple School Manager if you haven't already. The second is to set up your devices automatically using the power of Apple School Manager and Jamf. And then last, get all the apps and books and settings just pushed down to your devices all automatically. So what does that look like? Well, again, first, sign up for Apple School Manager. School.apple.com will allow you to enroll your school in this free program. If you've previously used some of Apple's older deployment programs prior to Apple School Manager, there's a whole migration process that you can take all right in the website here. Fairly self-explanatory, and it just walks you through the whole process. After you've signed up for Apple School Manager, you can then link it with Jamf. And this is what our management console looks like. So we're looking right now at Jamf Pro. And this is the Apple Education tab. So this is where we've actually uploaded our token that we get from Apple School Manager that establishes trust between the two. This will sync information that will come from all your data in Apple School Manager. It includes a list of all devices that you purchased, all apps that you own, and roster data too. I'll point out that Jamf was one of the first MDM vendors to fully support Apple School Manager. It's one of our key reasons why we love supporting Apple. So next, now that we've set up this back end here, we want to do this. We want to move away from a cart model into a spot where I can just give an iPad to a student, have them open up the box, power it on, and that's it. There is no step 3 at all to this. So what do these carts look like if you're using this? Well, it's a manual process. You typically have to take a Mac and you hook it up to these really expensive carts, and the thing can only sync about 30 iPads at a time. You're using apps like Apple Configurator to get this up and running here. And typically, students, if they know what they're doing, can unmanage these devices, which creates a really tough situation for IT. Versus if you use Apple School Manager to automate this process, it is completely automatic. We refer to this as our zero-touch deployment because IT doesn't need to touch these devices at all. In fact, you can assign them to a user right as they are booting up for the first time, and it remains managed. So if a student wipes the device and they turn it back on again, it always gets re-managed. I'm going to show you what those look like, what these settings look like here in Jamf Pro. So this is where I'm configuring my devices to automatically be supervised, to not allow the MDM profile to be removed. I'm enabling shared iPad here, and I'm making MDM mandatory, so they can't skip this at all. I'm also customizing the setup experience for the users. So notice I'm skipping things like the location, Apple ID, terms of service, all that stuff that I don't want my students to see anyways. So I've set up everything here in Jamf Pro. What does this look like now for our end users? Here's my iPad. It just boots up and it enters that familiar setup assistant that we see. I simply select my language, and then I need to connect to a Wi-Fi network. Now, you don't have to use a password-protected Wi-Fi network here. In fact, we recommend that you use a non-password-protected Wi-Fi network just for enrolling process, and then you can push down settings to have it join your secure Wi-Fi network later. The iPad then talks to Apple, and in fact, it more specifically talks to Apple School Manager, and it says, is this device owned by the organization? If that serial number is in there, it says yes, and it will flag it for enrollment. And instead of saying Jamf software there, it will say your school. Will automatically configure your iPad. Great. Notice I can't skip that page at all either. The MDM profile is now installed on my device, and all those setup screens that I checked earlier are skipped. And now I'm brought to my home screen, and it's ready to receive all of the apps and books and settings that I want to push down on there. So how do I configure my apps and books and settings? Well, I go back into Jamf Pro, and I'm using the volume purchase program, which is now under Apple School Manager. It's all under one umbrella, to get all of these apps that I purchase. These could be free apps that I purchase, or these could be paid apps that I purchase as well. A lot of app developers even give a discount for schools who buy them in bulk. So here, Jamf Pro is reading a list of all of those apps that I've purchased. It's also reading a list of all of the books that I purchased too, so you can also purchase ebooks. Then I'm configuring all of the different settings that I would like to push down onto the device. This will probably be some restrictions, of course, depending on your student's grade level and how much you would like to sort of put the students in a frame of management. So I can configure a lot of different things. You can see on the left sidebar here a list of everything that I can configure, from passcodes, Wi-Fi networks, VPN settings, email accounts. If they're using a Google account, I can configure that as well too. I can even put some nice web clips on the home screen. So we'll go back to our iPad. It's ready to receive all those management settings that we just set up there. It automatically grabs them all over the air, and all of those apps and books and settings are applied to the device. And it's ready to be used now by our students or our faculty. So, what are some next steps for you? First off, I highly recommend you check out our website. Contact us to get started. We've got sales and engineers folks all across the globe ready to talk to you about what this looks like in your environment. Every environment is unique, and we'd love to kind of walk you through that whole process. If you want to just learn more, we've got a great webinar section so you can see what's new in, say, iOS 10. If you want to focus more on Mac management, we've got great webinars around that. And if you want to dive deeper into some of the tech, we've got those as well, too. And lastly, check out Jamf Nation. Jamf Nation is our free community forum. We have over 40,000 members now here that are all sharing their best practices about how to manage Apple devices in both education and enterprise situations. So check it out. You can learn a lot from the folks that are in this community. So with that, I want to thank you and have a wonderful day.